Imagine waking up on a crisp winter morning to find your town blanketed in snow. And something else. Mysterious tracks, unlike anything you've ever seen, zigzagging through your streets, over rooftops, and even scaling sheer walls. Now picture those tracks stretching for over 100 miles, crossing rivers and baffling an entire region. Welcome to the In-Between. I'm Carol Ann, and today we're treading carefully through one of history's most perplexing mysteries, the case of the Devil's footprints. February 8th, 1855, in the quaint county of Devon in southwest England. Rolling hills, charming villages, and on this particular morning, a fresh blanket of snow covering the ground. It's like a postcard, except for one tiny detail that's about to turn this idyllic setting into the backdrop for one of history's most baffling mysteries. As the good folk of South Devon roll out of bed and look out their frost-covered windows, they're met with a sight that would make even the stiffest Englishman spill his tea. Snaking through the pristine snow are tracks, but not just any tracks. These aren't the paw prints of a neighbor's cat or the boot tracks of an early rising milkman. These are something altogether different. There on the ground is a line of kind of horseshoe-shaped hoof-like marks, each about 4 inches long and 3 inches wide, running single file with each print about 8 inches apart. Now, my first thought was, maybe it's just a really well-trained horse. Well, setting aside the fact that it would have to be a super small horse, I suggest you grab your beverage of choice and kick back for a bit because we are just getting started. These tracks don't just stick to the ground. No. That would be way too boring. They scale walls. They traipse over rooftops. They even seem to pass through narrow drain pipes, emerging on the other side without missing a step. And perhaps the most amazing of all, they cross a 2-mile stretch of the River Exe estuary, or the spot where the River Exe meets the English Channel. That's right. Whatever's making these tracks apparently takes a little stroll across the water. Jesus himself would be impressed. But wait, there's more. These tracks aren't from some strange animal that decided to cut across a few backyards. These tracks stretch for a mind-boggling 100 miles, maybe more. From Exmouth to Topsham, from Dawlish to Teignmouth. Across fields and farms, through towns and villages, this trail of impossible footprints stretches the entire South Devon area. It's like a paranormal pub crawl. Now imagine you're a simple Devon farmer or shopkeeper. You've lived your whole life in this one little area where the strangest thing you've ever seen is maybe a 2-headed calf at the county fair. Suddenly, you're trying to make sense of something that defies all logical explanation. Something that can climb walls, cross rivers, and cover vast distances in a single night. What would you do? Well, if you're anything like the good people of Devon in 1855, you'd probably panic, which is exactly what they do. As news of the tracks spreads faster than a fox in a henhouse, the whole area erupts into a frenzy of fear and speculation. Churches fill to bursting as terrified residents seek divine protection. Local militia groups form, patrolling the streets with muskets and pitchforks. Though what good they think these things will do against a wall-climbing, river-crossing entity is beyond me. But here's where things get really interesting. In times of inexplicable events, humans have a tendency to reach for the most dramatic explanations. And in the 19th century England, steeped in centuries of folklore and Christian tradition, there's one explanation that pops to the top of everyone's mind. The devil himself has paid a visit to Devon. That's right, Old Scratch, Beelzebub, the Prince of Darkness, whatever you want to call him, but suddenly he's the talk of every pub and parlor in the country. The idea spreads like wildfire. After all, who else could leave such bizarre tracks? Who else could traverse such impossible terrain so fast? And don't forget the hoof-like prints. If there's one thing everyone knows about the devil, it's that he's got a rather distinctive choice in footwear. Local legends and superstitions long simmering beneath the surface of polite society bubble up with renewed vigor. Stories of demonic visitations from centuries past are dusted off and retold with fresh urgency. That old tale about Farmer Giles' great-grandfather who claimed to have seen a cloven-hoofed figure dancing in the moonlight? Suddenly, it isn't just a quaint fireside story, but potential evidence in the case of the century. Some locals even claim to have heard unearthly shrieks in the night, or to have seen a dark, shadowy figure leaping from rooftop to rooftop. But not everyone is convinced that old Nick has decided to take a winter vacation in Devon. Some of the more skeptical residents propose alternative explanations. Maybe it's an escaped exotic animal from a traveling circus, or maybe a flock of birds. Stranger things have happened. Well, maybe not, but you get the idea. As the days wear on and no more tracks, the initial panic dials back a notch. But the mystery remains. The tracks are real. Hundreds of people have seen them, sketched them, measured them. Something crisscrossed Devon that February night, leaving behind a puzzle that is unsolved to this day. So, we find ourselves with a mystery that has endured for over 150 years. A set of tracks that seemingly defy all logical explanation, a panicked populace convinced they've been visited by the devil himself, and a whole lot of questions left unanswered. But is any of this true? It's time to channel up some Benedict Cumberbatch and dive into the evidence on both sides. Let's start with any historical documentation. Is there any? Luckily for us, the devil's footprints caused such a satanic panic that it made headlines in several newspapers, like the Exeter and Plymouth Gazette and the Western Luminary, not to mention the London Times. The Illustrated London News on February 17, 1855 reports, "It appears on Thursday night last, there was a very heavy fall of snow in the neighborhood of Exeter and the south of Devon. On the following morning, the inhabitants of the above towns were surprised at discovering the tracks of some strange and mysterious animal, endowed with the power of ubiquity, as the footprints were to be seen in all kinds of unaccountable places, on the tops of houses and narrow walls, in gardens and courtyards, enclosed by high walls and palings, or picket fences, as well as in open fields." Alrighty then. But it isn't just the papers that are buzzing about this bizarre occurrence. We have numerous eyewitness accounts from people who saw the tracks firsthand. One such account comes from Reverend H.T. Ellicombe, the vicar of Clyst St. George. In a letter to the Illustrated London News, he writes, "The creature seems to have approached the doors of several houses and then to have retreated, but no one has been able to discover the standing or resting point of this mysterious visitor. On Sunday last, the Reverend Mr. Musgrave alluded to the subject in his sermon and suggested the possibility of the footprints being those of a kangaroo." A kangaroo? But let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What do these tracks actually look like? Spoiler alert, they don't look like a kangaroo. But we're in luck because several sketches were made at the time. The most famous of these, published in the Illustrated London News, shows a series of hoof-like prints in a single file. Each print is described as being about 4 inches long and 2 3/4 inches wide, with a stride of about 8 to 16 inches. And the tracks don't just stick to open fields or roads. They are reported to go over houses, high walls, and even haystacks without disturbing the snow on the top. In some places, the tracks seem to go through small holes or tight spaces, emerging on the other side as if whatever made them had simply passed through solid objects. But maybe the most insane aspect of all is the sheer extent of the tracks. They were reported across an area of 100 square miles, crossing rivers and other obstacles that would have been impassable for any known animal. And all of this in a single night. Now, what about the weather conditions that night? Because they play a crucial role in this mystery. The night of February 8th is particularly cold with a heavy snowfall. I don't know how much snow, but it was at least enough to cover everything in a pretty good blanket. This fresh snow provides the perfect canvas for our mysterious track maker. But it also means that whatever left these tracks did so in a relatively short window of time between the end of the snowfall and the early morning when the tracks were discovered. It's worth noting that this isn't an isolated incident. Similar tracks have been reported in other places at different times. In 1840, similar mysterious tracks were found in Scotland. And in 1855, just a month after the Devon incident, similar tracks are reported in South Moulton, Devon. So we have multiple eyewitness accounts, newspaper reports, and even sketches of the tracks that occurred over a vast area in a short period of time, leaving a trail that seems to defy logical explanation. On the other hand, we're dealing with events that happened over 150 years ago. We can't go back and examine the tracks ourselves or interview the witnesses. We're relying on second-hand accounts and interpretations, all filtered through the lens of 19th century superstition and sensationalism. And evidence, especially 150-year-old evidence, can be tricky. It can be misinterpreted, exaggerated, or even fabricated. But now that it's out there for consideration, it's time to play devil's advocate, pun very much intended, and explore some potential explanations for our mysterious tracks. Let's start with the most obvious explanation: animals. After all, we're talking about tracks in the snow, and last time I checked, animals were pretty good at that. Some have suggested that the culprit might have been a badger, a fox, or even an escaped kangaroo. Thank you, Reverend Musgrave. The problem is, none of these animals quite fit the facts. Badgers and foxes don't typically travel in straight lines for miles on end, and I'm pretty sure they haven't mastered the art of scaling walls. As for the kangaroo theory, well, let's just say that if there was a 6-foot marsupial bouncing around Devon in 1855, someone probably would have noticed. Some researchers have proposed that the tracks might have been made by a wood mouse. These little critters are known to make strange tracks in the snow by hopping, leaving what looks like a line of hoofprints. It's an intriguing idea, but it doesn't explain how these tracks appeared on rooftops or how they crossed such long distances in one night. Moving on to the weather explanation, some have suggested that the tracks were actually formed by some kind of natural phenomenon. One theory proposes that chunks of ice might have fallen from telegraph wires, creating hoof-like impressions in the snow. It's an interesting thought, but it doesn't account for the tracks' continuity or their appearance in areas without telegraph wires. Another weather-related theory involves something called frost polygons. These are honeycomb-like patterns that can form in frozen soil under certain conditions. When snow falls on the top of these patterns, it can create tracks that look somewhat similar to the devil's footprints. But again, it doesn't explain the tracks on the rooftops or their linear nature. Now, let's venture into more controversial territory: hoaxes and pranks. It wouldn't be the first time someone faked out their neighbors, especially in a small community where entertainment might have been hard to come by in the dead of winter. But let's think about the logistics for a moment. We're talking about tracks that covered over 100 miles, allegedly in a single night. That would be a level of commitment that I cannot even comprehend. Some have suggested that multiple people might have been involved, each creating a section of the tracks. But that would require a level of coordination and secrecy that seems highly unlikely. And no one ever came forward to claim responsibility. Ever. Then there's the theory of mass hysteria or exaggeration. It's possible that a few odd tracks in the snow were blown way out of proportion as the news spread, with each retelling adding more fantastical elements like a hysterical version of Operator. We've seen this kind of thing happen before with other mysterious phenomena, but this doesn't quite explain the consistent descriptions from multiple eyewitnesses or the sketches made at the time. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that the truth lies in some combination of these factors. Maybe an animal did leave some unusual tracks, which were then exaggerated in retellings and perhaps even embellished by a few opportunistic hoaxers jumping on the bandwagon. And then, of course, there's the explanation that started it all. That these were indeed the footprints of the devil himself, out for a nighttime stroll through the Devon countryside. So the next time you're out on a snowy night, take a moment to look around. You never know what you might find, or who might find you. I have always loved this story. I'm not even going to pretend that I have any idea of what made those prints. I just hope I don't ever see them in my backyard. Can't get enough of the devil's mischief? Well, you're in luck. Click right here for more devilishly, see what I did there, good stories that'll set your curiosity ablaze. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.